Channel open. Welcome back to WeeklyTrek, a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions Podcast Network. I am your host, Alex Perry.
What's today's date? The date.
Today's show was recorded on May 17th, 2019, and is current through the end of Star Trek Discovery Season 2, so beware of spoilers. All right, let's get into the show.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
WeeklyTrek is a 30-minute news show covering the biggest stories from the Star Trek franchise, and boy, was there a big story this week. We are in a new golden age of Star Trek. There are 5 television shows at some point in production, possibly more on the way, and enough merchandise to fill the Bajoran wormhole. So stick with me, and I'll help you sort the real facts from a lot of the Dominion propaganda that you'll find online. For example, did you know that not a single shot from the Picard show has even been filmed? Yeah, I didn't think so, because we found out that wasn't true this week. And I can't do this alone. And my guest this week is returning guest and co-host of the excellent Snap Trek podcast, Jenn Tifft. Jenn, welcome back to WeeklyTrek.
Hi, Alex. It's so great to be here to talk to you about this exciting week we've had. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We have a name for a new show. We had the DS9 documentary premiere. It has been a huge week for Star Trek news. Well, I think I can probably guess what your answer to this might be, but you know we start this show every week with something that's got us feeling good about Star Trek. Jenn, what's got you moving at Warp 10?
So yeah, I mean, obviously the real answer to this question is the Picard show news, but I figure we're going to be talking about that extensively today. So more generally, what I'm just excited about is I personally, I've never given up on the idea of a Star Trek anthology series. That's always been something I've really wanted to see. And I may never get it, in the way I envisioned it. But I feel with all these new shows, like I'm getting it anyway. We've got a classic ship-based Trek, with Discovery. We've got this in-depth character dive in Picard, a Section 31 action show, a comedy, a kids show, maybe even, like a drama, Starfleet Academy 90210 type show. It might even be in the works. And I'm just very excited that they are taking full advantage of this big, beautiful Trek universe, that's been built over the past 50 years and trying new things and exploring different aspects and corners of the universe and in different ways. And it's what a time to be a Star Trek fan. And I'm just so excited.
It's incredible. And I think they really...
So incredible.
One of the things that lots of people have expressed concern about is, are we overloading on Star Trek? Which, from my perspective, the answer to that is always no under any circumstances. It can be literally the only thing on television. And it's still not for me.
I hear you, man.
Yeah. But we'll set that aside. I think one of the things that I am really excited about is that they do seem to have gravitated towards this idea that each show should have its own thing and be its own thing and feel its own way. Mm-hmm. And the devil will obviously be in the details, and we'll see how much that kind of shakes out once the shows actually end up on the air. But so far, they do sound pretty different.
Right.
And just from the very briefest of glimpses that we got of the Picard show this week, we have seen that, again, even that also has already kicked off with a slightly different kind of aesthetic to it.
Yes.
Than Star Trek Discovery. So that is all super exciting, and it allows for folks to kind of scratch different itches as it relates to their interest in the Star Trek universe. And as we talked about before, like, potentially not every one of these shows is going to be for everybody. I know that every one of these shows is going to be for me. That's just because of who I am and the way I'm constructed about Star Trek. But it does kind of let people do what they want and get what they want out of the experience.
Right. Yeah. Same for me. I'll watch them all. I don't care. But I just like that they're trying new things. And you're right. They may try something and it might not stick to the wall, but at least they tried it. Because I think the Star Trek universe is something that can fit in all these different genres. You can make a Star Trek story about any genre you could think of, because it's such a big, full mythology. And I think they're dipping into it. And I love that. And I'm willing to, let them try anything and I'll watch it and, see. And you're right. Some might be for me and some might not be my favorite, but it's all Trek. It's all good. It's so great to be a part of this, to be here for this.
And the franchise has proved that it can take a slightly different approach to the model and have that be very successful, which ties into what I'm feeling good about Star Trek this week, which is I think the third or fourth week in the row. The Deep Space Nine documentary.
Yes.
As a show that did kind of demonstrate that you could sort of break the mold entirely and totally upend what people thought Star Trek was and do it really successfully and do it in a way where 20 years later you would want to sit through an hour and a half documentary that you helped crowdfund, that you waited for, 3-4 years since it was first announced, to watch it, to get a glimpse of what Deep Space Nine looks like in high definition, to revisit the show and think about what a season 8 might look like. Mm-hmm. It's been proven it can be done. Star Trek doesn't just have to be kind of shit-based action adventure / social commentary science episodes, that it can take all different kinds of personalities to it.
Yeah, like the complaint, the complaints about Deep Space Nine when it came out about them being on a station instead of on a ship. I mean, you have you spent all this time building this world building, and then all you want to do is follow around ships named Enterprise, which I love, I'll watch that, all day. But, that's just one little corner of this big, beautiful, universe that they built. And Deep Space Nine was at the edge of it. And how cool is that? Like, how is that not sound exciting to you? You know what I mean? Even before we saw it. So it definitely fits in with what I was saying too. So yeah, and the documentary. I know we'll talk about it later, so I'll leave some of my comments, but it's so exciting.
So we are doing something special this week. This is one of 2 WeeklyTrek episodes that will drop this week. I really wanted to have an in-depth conversation about the Deep Space Nine documentary, but I recognize that there are lots of people who haven't seen it yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to put out a supplemental episode this week, which will be a discussion specifically of the Deep Space Nine documentary, the things we liked about it, what we thought about some of the directions that the documentary took, what we thought about the high definition footage. It will either drop at the same time or around the same time. So by the time you're listening to this, it should probably show up as a supplemental episode in your feeds. If not, it's coming very, very soon. But for those who hadn't had the chance to see it yet, I wanted to kind of separate it out. So it was the kind of thing that if you are planning to go to one of the cinematic showings in the UK or Ireland, for example, which won't happen until next month, you could revisit that episode and listen to that discussion afterwards and not have it take up this episode. So we will talk lots more about the Deep Space Nine documentary, but head on over to the supplemental episode where we will be discussing that. All right. Well, with that, let's turn to the week's top stories.
There's a war going on, and I'm a reporter.
So our big story this week, it was the CBS upfronts. I've been talking for a few weeks about how I thought there was going to be some kind of announcement about Star Trek at the CBS upfronts. This is an industry event every year where the networks and advertisers get together and the networks kind of sell their upcoming slate of shows to the advertisers. That used to be kind of the big fall primetime lineup on the networks. It has diversified a lot over the last few years as the networks have gotten into streaming platforms. And so CBS's upfronts presentation also included some information about CBS All Access shows, which include Star Trek. We know that the Untitled Picard Show, untitled no longer, hooray, is filming, and so we were anticipating there would be something at the CBS upfronts, and we got that something. So we got a name, and we got a first look at Sir Patrick Stewart returning to the role as Jean-Luc Picard. Very, very exciting. So first of all, let's get the name out of the way. What's the show called? Drumroll, please. Star Trek Picard. Hold on a second. Didn't I go on a big, long, near rant about a month ago about how the one thing in the world this show wasn't going to be called is Star Trek Picard? Well, it turns out I was wrong. The name of the show is Star Trek Picard. After months of saying that they were holding the name back because it revealed something big about the show, of Hanelle Culpepper, the director of the first 2 episodes of the show, having been specifically asked, is the name of the show Star Trek Picard? And her responding, no. It turns out the name of the show, Star Trek Picard. Jen, what do you think?
Well, I never trust denials from the Hollywood types ever again after the boondoggle of them saying to our faces Benedict Cumberbatch was not playing Khan. straight up lie right to our faces. So I never believe the denials. After that, fool me once and then I'm done. But I'm actually excited about the title. Star Trek Picard is the title I wanted. I just want it nice, simple. I love that it's just about him, just focused on literally one of the greatest fictional characters in all of history, and I don't want it to be called anything else. I just want it to be just about him, just a character study on him. And that's what that says to me, just Star Trek Picard straight up. I think it's going to also, having it called that also can appeal to, more regular fans too, because everybody loves Picard. The name recognition is right up there with Spock, with people who aren't, might not be as in depth into Star Trek as we are. So I think having him being in the title is going to draw in more of a crowd too, So I love it. I love the title.
I totally agree. I think a month ago when I went on my, it's not going to be called Star Trek Picard rant, I think I was feeling, I wasn't sure I liked that name as much. Mm-hmm. And I was sort of thinking that it was going to be some other name and that name was going to make me go, wow. Right. But every time I tried to think of what that name could be, Star Trek Destiny, I sort of ended up with, But when I saw that title screen of Star Trek Picard, I thought to myself, yep, that's it. That's all I need it to be. That's all I want it to be.
Right. Same.
Yeah, I didn't know that was all I needed it to be. I thought I wanted something big and grand and Shakespearean. And, though, Shakespeare also called his plays like Hamlet and Macbeth. So I guess this is very Shakespearean in a way.
Oh, and Patrick Stewart is literally the best Macbeth I've ever seen in my life. He's ruined Macbeth for me, all other Macbeths for me. I don't know if that's saying anything, about what this, how this show's going to end up. If I don't really want it to be Shakespearean, it's a little scary about where my Picard's going to end up. But but that's an excellent point. It is very Shakespearean.
He has ruined pretty much every Shakespeare character I've seen him play. So overall, this name, amazing. We got our title card, Star Trek Picard. The A in the title card is the Starfleet Delta, which I thought was very, very cool.
Yeah, nice touch.
Might have been nice if they had Star Trek in the Next Generation font rather than the original series font, but we won't quibble too much.
That's how I felt too. Yeah, I guess who cares? You know what I mean? So it's really a nitpick, but I myself prefer the Next Gen font also.
And I did see a fan mock-up of if you did it in the Next Gen font, and it did look really, really nice.
Oh, I haven't. I'll have to look that up after.
Yeah, it's cool. I want to see that. But it's possible that this will not be the kind of final presentation of the logo title, because Star Trek Discovery itself went through at least 2 iterations of the Star Trek Discovery logo before we got the final logo that we have.
I remember that too. And even the Delta, they changed the Delta a little bit too, even.
Yeah, they changed it and made it more TOS-like.
Yeah. So who knows? They're not done, refining everything, so.
That's right. But that's not all we got out of the upfront. So we got the name, we got the title card, and for folks who were at the upfront, we got a very short clip. That clip has not been released online. So if you weren't one of the lucky people in the room, nobody else has seen it. But there were some reporters who were quick enough to snap a picture. And so we do have one still from that short clip, which there has also been a number of leaked photographs of filming that have been circulating online over the last few days that have kind of filled in a couple more details, I think, about the specific scenes that were being filmed. So the description of the tiny clip that was relayed from people in the room is it's Picard. He's in a room. He approaches a Starfleet officer, and the officer asks for his name. And he kind of gives an incredulous response like, "What, you don't know who I am?" style. And we got a quick pick out of that, which very much has the kind of the expression on Patrick Stewart's face is very much sort of "I'm surprised you don't know who I am" type face. And there are some really cool little details. So Picard himself is not wearing a Starfleet uniform. So that seems to further confirm that at this point in his life, Picard is not a member of Starfleet anymore, but we do see some Starfleet uniforms in the background. We see two. They are black uniforms with the colored shoulders, very close to the Voyager and first 4 season of Deep Space Nine style. The differences between what we saw and those are the Star Trek Picard uniforms seem to have a high collar and no turtleneck as far as we can gather. So it's almost like it's a bit of a mashup between the Next Generation in the way that the collar is constructed and the Voyager in the color scheme. We did not get a shot that showed us what the comm badge looked like, what the rank pips looked like, even really what the front of the uniform looks like. The leaked photos, which were from the Anaheim Convention Center, it seems like they were filming there a couple of weeks ago, and that's where this short clip was filmed that we got at the CBS upfronts. You can see a little better, but the photos are taken from so far away, there's not enough detail to be able to see the delta, other than to get a general sense that it's different than the deltas that we've seen before, but while retaining a similar shape, and that potentially these uniforms are actually pretty similar to a uniform design we've seen before, and that's not on screen. That is actually in a comic book, the Star Trek Countdown comic, which was released prior to Star Trek 2009 and was sort of designed to tell the story of the destruction of Romulus, showed us a uniform design very similar in that it had the kind of Voyager color scheme with the high collar and rank pips actually on the left shoulder, which if you spend a lot of time scrutinizing these leaked pictures like I have, and you really zoom in, in a couple of places you can see potentially there is rank insignia sort of basically above the comm badge on the colored part of the uniform. Jen, first of all, what do you think about that still? Did you see the leaked pictures? Are you liking what you're seeing from Star Trek Picard?
I did. So, when you see that, if you ignore the person over Picard's shoulder, that's obviously in a Star Trek uniform. There's nothing on Patrick Stewart himself to designate this as a Star Trek thing. You know what I mean? As he could be playing anyone, but knowing that was Patrick Stewart playing Jean-Luc Picard, even though he's just, wearing like a black suit or whatever he's in, like I felt so giddy. It's like there's nothing here. It's just a picture of Patrick Stewart. I see pictures of Patrick Stewart all the time. I follow him on Twitter, but just knowing that this was really happening. He's on a set being Jean-Luc, and it's so exciting, even though it's just one little still. And and then of course you throw in, then over the shoulder you see someone in a Star Trek uniform, and I did see the leaked pictures of the set too, and it's like, this is actually happening. This is really happening. It's really happening. It's going to happen. It's a pretty, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not an expert on this, but it's a pretty quick turnover, isn't it? If they start filming now, to have it ready by the end of the year.
Yeah, so they've started filming late April. The intent is for it to go up before the end of the year. So they've probably been filming now a couple of weeks, really probably 3-4 weeks at most. I think some people have speculated that from what Alex Kurtzman has been saying around this show being kind of more of a psychological portrait of the character, that potentially it won't be as special effects heavy as Discovery. Because that's what takes a huge amount of time for those episodes to make it to air, is the significant amount of post-production that goes into it. If you don't have as many visual effects, you probably don't need quite as much time. So that might also help the timeline. But, after the Discovery experience, I'm thrilled they're filming it. It means it's happening.
Right.
I won't kind of expect any release date until they show us on a screen or in a press release somewhere, this is the day that the show is dropping. Because we did get some significant delays, some less significant delays in the original premiere of Star Trek Discovery. So you can never quite count out that the same thing could also happen here for the Picard show.
That's true. I won't get my hopes up too much, but
but I want it, precious. I want it before the end of 2019.
Oh, give it to me now. I want it now. But yeah, well, I guess too. Then I don't know when they're planning season 3 of Discovery. I know they want to stagger everything, because the idea is to get us to never cancel our CBS All Access subscription. So
quite successfully, I might add.
Right. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So I don't know if I'm sure that will factor into when everything gets released too.
Yeah. So it seems like Discovery is going to go back in front of the cameras in July. And that show, it takes about a year from cameras rolling to the episodes hitting the air.
So I don't want to wait that long.
Well, it actually may not be quite that long, because if we use season 2 as an example, so they started filming season 2 in April of 2018, and the first episode premiered January of 2019. So actually that was about 9 months different. Okay.
Yeah, I guess once you have the initial, sets built and everything,
right.
That's and you have the visuals down,
Right. So if they go in front of the camera in July, that means that they will, so that's like 3 months later than they did for season 2, assuming it takes the same amount of time. That first episode of Discovery season 3 should be ready to air at some point in the spring, which would line up really well if the Picard show does make it onto the air by late 2019, early 2020, because we know it's going to be 10 episodes. That's 10 weeks.
10 weeks.
So that'll push us into
exciting.
So let's say it would have started at the beginning of the year of 2020. That would be January, February, and push us halfway into March, which would then put it right around the time that Discovery would be ready to premiere. So you could pivot right from Picard season 1 into Discovery season 3, which would be very cool.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
I love that we are having this conversation about more than one Trek.
I know.
This is so great. I feel like I'm in the 90s again.
I know. We got 14 weeks of Star Trek this year. Next year, we're on track for at least 23.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which is half a year.
That's great. I'll take it, man.
Absolutely. And it's certainly within the realm of possibility that we get at least one of these animated series, most likely Lower Deck, since that one seems to be a bit further ahead than the Nickelodeon show, on the air in 2020. So we could have 3 shows to enjoy throughout the year, very realistically.
An embarrassment of riches.
An embarrassment of riches, and one that will not be shared alone in the United States. So there has been an announcement this week of the international distribution deal for Star Trek Picard that came earlier this week. It was announced that outside of the US, where Star Trek Picard will be airing exclusively on CBS All Access, as with Star Trek Discovery, and in Canada, Star Trek Picard will be on the Space Channel and Crave, so exactly the same places where you're getting Star Trek Discovery, but outside of the US and Canada, Star Trek Picard will not be premiering on Netflix as Discovery has. Star Trek Picard will be premiering on Amazon Prime internationally. So outside of the US and Canada, you will need to have an Amazon Prime subscription in order to access the Picard show. Seems like there was a bit of a bidding war for Star Trek Picard, and it seems like Amazon won that bidding war. It's a little bit of a shame for international fans who don't currently have subscriptions to both, because now you need to have subscriptions to both in order to watch both shows. But super exciting that we now have that locked in and we know where folks can go to get Star Trek Picard. So Jen, that's a mixed bag for international fans, right? It's cool that they're getting it, not necessarily so cool that they need to go to a separate location in order to access it.
I mean, I kind of just think that we're, just in a transitional period in the way everything's televised. And right now we're just, you got to pick and choose what you want from different streaming services. And that's just, how it is. And I mean, like, we were talking about everything being staggered anyway. So theoretically, if someone didn't want to pay for 2 streaming services, they could have Netflix, when Discovery's on, and then Amazon Prime when Picard's on, you know what I mean? I'd follow Star Trek anywhere.
Totally.
So it's like, tell me what I need to buy. Like, shut up and take my money. But I get that it's different than the way we've consumed television before. But also, I mean, you make decisions like that now. Like, you make decisions like do you want to pay for HBO? It just for, like, if you're a Game of Thrones fan or something like that, is it worth the extra money to upgrade to that premium channel or whatever? So, it's really not as different as it was, but I get it. I just get, people don't like change.
So much fun Star Trek Picard news. There will be more, I'm sure. Now we have the name. Now we know the show is filming. Our next kind of big point will be San Diego Comic-Con in July, 2 weeks before Star Trek Las Vegas, where I would anticipate we will get our first trailer for Star Trek Picard, but I think there will probably be plenty of news in the meantime for us to discuss. So many more fun things on the way. I think this won't become kind of WeeklyTrek / Star Trek Picard, but it's going to be a big piece of our conversation for the weeks ahead. So let's switch gears slightly. I know we said we would talk about the DS9 documentary in a supplemental episode, but for everybody, the home media release for the Deep Space Nine documentary is on the way. So if you attended the US cinematic screenings, you would have seen a title card prior to the documentary starting that said that the Blu-ray and the DVD would be available on August 6th. And the pre-order links are now live on Amazon.com. It's the only place right now where you can get it. I'm sure it will proliferate out to other places that sell Blu-rays and DVDs. Really, there's been no public announcement yet of the home media release, other than Shout Factory have announced that there will be a limited edition Blu-ray that they will only print 1,500 copies. It's a little interesting. We're still trying to get to the bottom of it. It seems like there could be as many as 3 different versions of the documentary on home media. So there's going to be the standard release, which you can buy on Amazon.com, which looks like it might just be the documentary and maybe a few behind-the-scenes features. Then there will be the version for backers, which the DS9 documentary team indicated this week would have material on it only for the backer edition. And we know they've promised a significant number of behind-the-scenes features as part of that. But then they also indicated that this limited edition release that Shout Factory has announced has additional content on it that was created by Shout and not by the DS9 documentary team. We don't know what any of that is yet, other than that it exists. So we're still trying to sort it out. There's been no indication yet about international release of the DVD or the Blu-ray. So far, the links are only live on Amazon.com. That doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be. It just means they haven't been announced yet. And I'm sure at some point there will also be a digital copy that you can purchase from iTunes and Amazon. But again, those aren't available yet. But as soon as we know anything about them, we will bring that to you. Jen, super exciting that there are potentially lots of behind-the-scenes features for the DS9 documentary. You excited?
Yes. We'll talk about it later, but yeah, we might have some guesses on what some of the bonus features are, and they're exciting. And yeah, it's worth getting it just for the HD footage alone.
Yes,
just to have that. But we can talk later.
I discovered that your intrepid WeeklyTrek host has a very, very brief cameo in the DS9 documentary. And I'm hoping that in the special features, I will have an expanded role. But we'll talk about that in the supplemental.
That's great.
So that's coming, and more conversation of the Deep Space Nine documentary on our other little episode this week.
You make some very good points, Captain. But it's still all speculation and theory.
All right, we've talked about the facts, so now let's speculate on what's going to happen in the future of Star Trek. So each week, I and my guest give a wish or a theory for the Star Trek franchise. So Jen, let's hear your wish or theory for this week.
So I don't want to speculate on Star Trek Picard. I want to know nothing. I want to have no expectations. I want to just enjoy the story that they want to tell me about one of my all-time favorite fictional characters. I'm not even going to go there with Picard. So I have just a quick one for Discovery Season 3.
Let's do it.
So this is a pretty obvious one, but I think it might be an interesting way they're going to frame the season. So my theory is I don't think we've seen the last of the 23rd century.
Okay.
I mean, that's pretty obvious because somehow we have to get, Michelle Yeoh back to the 23rd century to, for Section 31 show, to help rebuild or destroy Section 31, however you want to look at it. But they also left some very significant characters behind, with Ash Taylor and L'Rell, and so I think what we might see is some, kind of like some scenes like meanwhile back in 2250, but or whatever, and then to kind of help set up for the new Section 31 show, maybe. And I think it's just going to be framed like that, like there might be like a B plot about what's going on in the 23rd century, in some episodes. So we might get to see more of Ash, running Section 31 and L'Rell running the Klingon Empire. And I hope that's what we say. I guess this is more of a wish, / prediction, but we definitely haven't seen the last of time travel in Discovery for sure.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely haven't seen the last of time travel in Discovery, and I just think it'd be really interesting to have 2 time periods in play, in season 3. I think would be really interesting. So
yeah, I agree. I think that would be really interesting. I mean, we know that Georgiou, who just went into the 32nd century, probably has to get back to the 23rd at some point in order for the Section 31 show to sort of work conceptually. And we think that Ash Tyler is going to have a role in that show. Yeah, I think either having it be doing more in the 23rd century, there are a few ways they could go. They could either do that as part of Discovery Season 3. They could do that as part of potentially a Christopher Pike spin-off, which I know a lot of fans are really interested in having, or they could do some of that work through more short treks. We could get a short trek on L'Rell and on Ash Tyler and on Sarek and Amanda and kind of follow their stories after the events of Star Trek Discovery Season 2 if they decide not to revisit that in Season 3. But yeah, these are great characters. I think they absolutely should kind of find opportunities to continue to tell their stories, even though the main narrative for Discovery has moved to a different place.
Right. Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm so excited. They're so far in their future. I mean, I cannot wait for that. That's what I was hoping for, originally. I was hoping to, really where no one has gone before, I can't wait. but also love the characters they left behind. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's the one shame about them having done that is they've done a really good job of kind of fleshing out this supporting cast of characters. Obviously, they ended the stories of some of them, like Admiral Cornwell, before they moved into the future. But there are others for whom, like what happens to L'Rell, it would be really interesting to see, is she still the Chancellor of the Klingon Empire in the time of the original series? We don't know if that's the case or not, because they never addressed that in the original series. Or what happens to her between the end of Discovery Season 2 and the original series if that's not the case. There's a lot of stories to tell there, and I would like for them to find a way to tell them. So my theory this week is another listener submission. So this is from Carl Wonders at Listening to Film on Twitter. And he submitted a wish for the franchise, which is that, and I'll just read his tweet to me. I wish that starting with Season 3 of Star Trek Discovery, the writers will remember that good dramatic stories can be told without going dark or making our characters miserable. Which I think is an interesting take and potential critique on some of the work that Discovery Season 2 did. It definitely seemed to be very centered on finding the drama directly from the characters who were on the screen. And those characters had lots of fertile backstory to explore around, Burnham's family history, around Saru's experiences with his home planet and with the oppression that he suffered there. And what's interesting is, I kind of think with the change in Discovery for Season 3, they won't necessarily be able to rely on the backstories of the characters as that kind of narrative fodder, because the characters are pretty far removed from the relationships that cause that kind of tension. They are now in a very new place and a new time, and that will have its own set of implications. So, I think that Discovery is sort of moving in that direction as well. What do you think about that idea, Jen?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they're kind of in a Voyager position now. So we might get more standalone episodes where there's more potential for that sort of thing. I agree. I think our Discovery characters are so full of joy. Like when I guess that sounds kind of weird because a lot of bad stuff has gone down. But I mean, when they're like when Tilly and Michael are figuring out a problem together, there's joy. When our bridge crew is interacting with each other and solving a problem, there's joy. So I think seeing all these characters with more traditional Star Trek, I hate to say anomaly of the week because that has like a negative connotation, but I mean just solving problems together. Like there's more room for joy and less darkness. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So yeah, so I agree with that. And I mean we're in a dark place right now, so I get what in the world, so I kind of get where all the darkness is coming from, and I need some of that too, and but I think we might get some, that might be what the Picard series is for, and then Discovery can have more. It doesn't always have to use that as their driving their drama. So I don't know, we need some of both, I guess, in my opinion.
And they're working with a blank slate.
Yeah.
Who knows what this future that they've jumped into is? Can we draw some conclusions from Calypso? Potentially not, because we know that the ship in Calypso had been hanging around for 1,000 years, but they didn't say 1,000 years from when. So it could be the case that that's 1,000 years even further removed from, we were counting 1,000 years up from the 23rd century, but we know that's not where the ship is anymore. So that could, we thought it then it meant that it was the 32nd century. Maybe it's the 42nd century. And so they really are working with a blank slate in so many ways. And that does give them a whole new kind of universe to play with and lots of different kind of building blocks to figure out what that looks like. And they can construct it any way they want to. And, you know, as long as it has kind of the core principles and messages of Star Trek kind of at its base, I think it will be really exciting. Do you have a wish or a theory for Discovery or the future of the franchise that you'd like to share? Tweet them to me at WeeklyTrek, and I might feature your theory in a future episode. Well, that's all the time we've got for this episode of Weekly Trek. Thank you so much to my guest, Jenn Tifft, for joining me today. Jenn, how can people contact you if they want to continue the conversation?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Quarks on Twitter. You could also find my podcasts on Twitter at SnapTrek. And also, I will be joining actually the Tricorder Transmission soon.
Amazing!
In their Star Trek Adventures gameplay podcast. That's called Faraday. And it's great fun. And our game master, you know, Felicity Quartz Pickens is really smart and creative, and we have a great crew. And I play First Officer Commander Kiba, and I can't wait for you to meet her. But Faraday is also on Twitter. You can find that at Faraday, Faraday STPOD, Faraday Star Trek Pod. So yeah, so check that out when that comes out if you are interested in that sort of thing.
I am so excited for Faraday. I think it's going to be really fun.
So much fun.
And you guys have a really good group put together. And if you are a Patreon of Tricorder, you can access the kind of prologue episode right now. There aren't publicly released episodes, but if you're a Patreon, you do have access to a little bit of content to kind of tease what that's going to look like. And I know that I think that the first publicly released episode is coming very soon, and I am waiting with bated breath because I think Star Trek Adventures is very cool, and I love the idea of doing a podcast version of it.
It is. It's exciting. Like I said, I mean, our game master's so creative. If it's like a Star Trek episode every time, you know, it's like you're in a new Star Trek episode and a unique scenario, and it's great fun. So hope you like it.
Yeah, I'm really excited. You can find this show on Twitter at WeeklyTrek and me at Alexander T. Perry. And if you enjoy the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. And please check out some of the other great shows on the Tricorder Transmissions. There was, I actually haven't listened yet, but looks like a particularly fabulous episode of Trek Ranks that just dropped, Top 5 Shapes, which Jenn, you were one of the guests on that as well, which I just think is such a cool idea.
Oh, it was such a fun topic. It's so outside the box, perfect Trek Ranks topic. It's a topic you only find there. But yeah, it turned out to be a really interesting conversation.
Oh, I'm so looking forward to listening to it. And if you like our shows, please also consider becoming a Patreon of Tricorder, which you can find at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. And lastly, if you're looking for Star Trek news on the internet, I hope you will turn to trekcore.com. Well, until next week, thank you, Jenn. Thank you to all my listeners, and live long and prosper.